When people think about the fall of the Roman Empire, their minds immediately conjure dramatic images: barbarians storming the gates, collapsing legions, or emperors poisoned in their marble palaces. But the truth, as always, is far more complex and, in a way, more frightening. Empires don't just crumble from outside attacks, they rot from within, corroded by internal forces, and one of the most destructive is always money. Rome didn't fall just because of invasions or corruption. It collapsed because its currency imploded. And the lessons of that collapse still apply to every modern economy that thinks it can mess with money and get away with it. History is a merciless teacher, and it has one core lesson for us. The destruction of currency is the destruction of civilization. Let's go back in time and set the scene. For centuries, the backbone of the Roman economy was the silver denarius. First minted around 211 BC, it was made of nearly pure silver, a guarantee of value that was trusted across the vast empire and even beyond. Roman soldiers were paid with it, merchants demanded it, and ordinary people stored their savings and wealth in this coin. The denarius wasn't just money, it was the materialization of trust. The power of the empire and the value of the currency were intimately linked. As long as people believed in Rome, they believed in its money. But running an empire is an incredibly expensive business. Armies needed to be paid to defend borders, roads and aqueducts built to keep infrastructure running, and wars financed to expand and protect territory. Over time, by the 2nd century AD, Rome found itself stretched thin. Military expenses to defend the borders against Germanic tribes in the north, the Parthians in the east, and to quell internal unrest became unsustainable. Tax revenues simply couldn't keep up with the costs. The emperors then turned to an age-old trick, a solution that seemed politically painless: debasement of the currency. Instead of raising taxes, an always unpopular and risky move, they opted for a subtler route. They started to gradually reduce the amount of silver in the denarius. They mixed the silver with cheaper metals, like copper or bronze, and kept the coin's weight and size, pretending that nothing had changed. The numbers tell the chilling story. In the reign of Emperor Augustus, at the dawn of the empire, the denarius contained about 95% silver. It was a noble metal, a symbol of power. By the time of Emperor Caracalla in the early 3rd century, the coin's purity had fallen to about 50%. The deterioration accelerated at a dizzying pace. By the reign of Gallienus in the mid-3rd century, the denarius had less than 5% silver. A coin once made of solid metal became a bronze disc with a thin silver wash. The population could see the difference, feel the difference, and trust evaporated. The result was devastating: inflation. Prices skyrocketed because the money no longer had real value. A measure of wheat that once cost a single denarius suddenly cost dozens. This wasn't an abstract theory. It was a brutal reality that destroyed the lives of ordinary citizens. Soldiers demanded higher pay to cover rising costs. Merchants stopped accepting worthless coins, preferring to barter or get paid in gold if possible. Local economies reverted to direct trade because no one trusted the official currency anymore. And the more trust eroded, the more emperors minted cheaper coins, hoping that volume could replace value. It was a vicious cycle, the same cycle that has repeated in countless inflationary crises ever since. The crisis peaked during what historians call the crisis of the 3rd century. Between 235 and 284 AD, Rome endured nearly 50 years of chaos, invasions, plagues, civil wars, and a complete economic collapse. Emperors rose and fell with dizzying speed, sometimes reigning for only a few months before being assassinated. Behind all the political drama was a broken financial system. Taxes were demanded in coins that were worth less and less. Farmers abandoned their land rather than pay, and trade networks fragmented. The Roman government tried desperate measures, such as price controls and mandatory forced labor, to keep the system afloat. Nothing worked. One emperor, Diocletian, tried in a last-ditch effort to stop the bleeding. In 301 AD, he issued the edict on maximum prices, fixing the cost of more than 1,000 goods and services, from grains to wages. Violators faced the death penalty. The edict was a disaster. Prices could not be controlled by decree when the money itself was worthless. The black market exploded and official trade simply collapsed. People quickly learned that the law could not give value to a broken currency. Eventually, Rome abandoned the denarius altogether. Constantine the Great introduced the solidus, a gold coin with consistent purity, around 312 AD. It restored some stability, and the coin lasted for centuries in the Eastern Roman Empire, or Byzantine Empire. But by then, the Western Empire was fatally weakened. The debasement of the denarius had hollowed out Rome's economic core. Armies could no longer be sustained, trade networks were shattered, and most importantly, trust had vanished. The fall of Rome wasn't a single event, but a long process of disintegration, and the currency's collapse was one of its sharpest threads. The question that remains is, what does this mean for us today? It means that the destruction of money is always the destruction of empires. Rome thought it could trick its people by issuing coins that looked the same but contained less real value. Modern governments think they can do the same by printing paper, manipulating interest rates, or using inflation to erase debt. But the result is always the same. The population pays the price, wealth is destroyed, and trust collapses. Rome learned this lesson the hard way, and if we ignore it, we will too. History didn't stop teaching us after Rome. Every major inflationary crisis since then has repeated the same pattern. Governments devalue money to cover their costs, elites protect themselves with real assets, and ordinary people are left helpless. The Roman monetary crisis is just the first large-scale example, a true blueprint for collapse. Fast forward to the 20th century, and the echoes are deafening. After World War I, Germany faced crippling reparations under the Treaty of Versailles. The government printed marks to cover its obligations, thinking it could paper over the debt, just as Rome minted more coins. By 1923, hyperinflation was at its peak. A loaf of bread that cost 1 mark before the war cost more than 200 billion marks by the end of that year. People carried wages home in wheelbarrows. Retirees starved as their life savings evaporated. And just as in Rome, those who had debt saw it wiped out by inflation, while those with real assets, land, factories, foreign currency, emerged stronger. Money lost all meaning, and economic despair fueled the political extremism that paved the way for Hitler's rise. Zimbabwe followed the same path in the early 2000s. Facing land confiscations, falling production, and mounting debt, the government turned to the money printer. By 2008, inflation had reached an unbelievable level, an annual rate of 89.7 sextillion%. Prices doubled every 24 hours. Stores couldn't change their price tags fast enough. Eventually, Zimbabwe abandoned its currency altogether, forcing citizens to trade in US dollars or South African rands. Once again, a government thought it could cheat reality, and once again the people paid the price. But you don't have to look only at the extremes. Even in developed economies today, the Roman pattern lives on. Consider the United States. In 1971, President Richard Nixon delinked the dollar from the gold standard, severing the last tie between the currency and a tangible asset. From that moment, the dollar became what economists call a fiat currency, backed not by gold, but by faith in the government. And, just as in Rome, the temptation to spend beyond their means became irresistible. In the decades that followed, Public debt skyrocketed, the money supply expanded, and inflation became a constant hum. While we haven't seen wheelbarrows full of money, what we've seen is a steady erosion of purchasing power. $1 in 1971 could buy what today costs more than $6. The coins look the same, the bills look the same, but the value has been hollowed out. And that's the real pain point, the feeling that the system isn't fair. The trick is always the same. Governments disguise inflation as growth. They say higher wages mean prosperity, even if the cost of living rises faster. They present debt as investment, even when it funds consumption. They point to soaring stock markets as proof of wealth, even when most of the population owns no stock. Just like the Roman emperors, they pretend that nothing fundamental has changed, while they quietly extract value from every coin, every bill, every paycheck. What makes this so dangerous today is the global scale. Rome's collapse was an imperial crisis. Weimar's hyperinflation was national. Zimbabwe's was local. But today, the entire world runs on fiat currencies, massive debts, and central banks willing to print trillions at the first sign of a crisis. This means the next collapse won't be confined to a single empire or country. It will ripple across the globe. And if history is any guide, those who will suffer won't be the elites who own assets, but the millions who depend on wages, pensions, and savings denominated in increasingly fragile currencies. You might be asking, what do I, as an individual, take away from all this? If the rules aren't made for us, how can we win? The first thing to understand, the most valuable lesson from Rome, is that inflation isn't an accident, it's a policy. It's the silent tax that has broken empires for more than 2,000 years. And the fact that few people simply tell you this is the biggest problem. But now you know. The second thing to realize is that real wealth isn't in paper or digits on a screen. It's in assets that hold their value when money doesn't. Land, skills, productive businesses, resources. The great pain for many of us is seeing that as we work, the value of our effort is corroded. The solution is to change your perspective. You're not just saving, you're converting your labor into real assets. Those who understood this from ancient Rome to today were the ones who protected themselves. Third, never assume that stability is permanent. First-century Romans would have laughed if you told them their coins would one day be worthless. Germans in 1913 would have scoffed at the idea of wheelbarrows full of cash. Zimbabweans in the 80s thought their independence promised prosperity. Yet, in each case, the same story unfolded. The fall of Rome reminds us that financial systems can collapse slowly, and then, suddenly, trust simply vanishes. When money ceases to be real, society itself begins to unravel. Contracts fail, trade breaks down, armies dissolve, and governments lose legitimacy. The barbarians at the gate may have finished the job, but the real killer was always inside the treasury. And here's the big takeaway for you. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. If you don't understand it, it can crush you just the same. The Roman monetary crisis wasn't just about bad emperors or greedy elites. It was about the fragility of money itself when it is abused by power. And that fragility has never gone away. If this video gave you a new perspective on money and history, a piece of knowledge you may never have been given, click subscribe. And hit the bell, because history holds the answers, and I'll show you where to look for them.